Chapter 8. Something survived. They rounded the bend cautiously, weapons at the ready, only to see a figure slumped against the tunnel wall. As Steve's flashlight illuminated the scene, the light fell on Stan, his machete resting across his knees, its blade slick with blood. His shirt was torn and smeared with grime, and dark smudges streaked his face. Peter exhaled sharply, a mix of relief and exasperation washing over his features. Damn it, Stan. You scared the hell out of us. Stan looked up, his breathing still heavy, though his expression was calm, even cheerful. You boys made good time, but you're late. Cops came. Party's over. Peter snorted, shaking his head. You and your damn metaphors. He walked over, crouching beside his brother. You good? Stan nodded, brushing dirt from his arms. Yeah, I'm fine. Just dirty. John and Steve exchanged uneasy glances. Steve's flashlight lingered on the bloodied machete before flicking back to Stan's face. What happened? Peter asked cautiously. Stan waved a dismissive hand. Nothing to worry about. Took care of it. You can head back to the house now. That's not an answer, John pressed, his voice sharper than he intended. You're covered in blood. You've clearly been in a fight. What exactly did you take care of? Stan met John's gaze evenly, his light tone never wavering. I said it's fine. Everything's fine. It got messy, sure, but that's the job, right? He smiled faintly, as if his cryptic reassurance should be enough. Steve shifted uncomfortably. Uncle Stan, you look like you've been through hell. Are you sure? I said it's fine. Stan cut in, his voice firmer this time, but still calm. He stood, using the machete as leverage, and wiped the blade clean on his pant leg. A little blood and dirt don't mean much. Now, unless you've got something else to ask, I'd say our little search party can call it a night. Peter clapped a hand on Stan's shoulder, his relief evident. Told you he's tougher than nails, he said, glancing back at John and Steve. Nothing's gonna keep my brother down. John's unease didn't fade, though he kept his thoughts to himself. The image of Stan bloodied, breathing hard, yet eerily composed, was burned into his mind. The man had clearly been through something intense, but his unwillingness to elaborate only deepened the mystery. Steve, still uneasy, finally nodded. If you're sure. I'm sure, Stan said with finality, slinging the machete over his shoulder. Let's head back. No sense in staying down here any longer than we need to. As they turned to retrace their steps, John lingered a moment longer, his instincts screaming that there was more to Stan's encounter than he was letting on. But for now, he kept his questions to himself, filing the unease away for later. The smell of blood and rot lingered as they made their way back, leaving John with a growing sense that the real danger had only just begun. As they trudged back through the damp tunnels, the echo of their footsteps and the occasional drip of water amplified the silence. John's thoughts swirled like a storm, the dim flashlight beams catching shadows that seemed to shift just beyond the edges of his vision. Peter's earlier story about the changed resurfaced in his mind. Reflecting from his experience with the changed nocturnal animals they hunt with purpose, John said out loud to no one in particular, the words delivered with a casualness that belied their weight. Those words twisted in John's brain, attaching themselves to the changed. The younger ones especially, they didn't just lurch or stumble blindly. No, they moved with intent, sometimes terrifyingly precise. John glanced at Stan's back, his machete still slung over one shoulder. What was down here? His mind flipped through every scenario, from wild animals to the changed themselves. Stan's calm demeanor unsettled him more than the blood on his blade. A pang of dread clawed at his chest as another thought crept in. I need to leave this place. The realization settled heavy, like lead in his gut. The satellites, the caves, even the family, they were a temporary reprieve, not a solution. He couldn't shake the feeling that the more time he spent here, the more he was tempting fate. As they passed past a particularly damp section of the tunnel, John's mind wandered to a memory he'd buried deep. He thought about the time he got sick, the fever that racked his body, leaving him delirious for days. But he'd gotten better. He wasn't like the others who hadn't. He pictured the sick people he'd seen, those who didn't recover. The ones who died, their faces haunting him even now. But it wasn't the dying that unnerved him the most. It was the changed who lived after death. He recalled the elderly ones, their bodies broken, their movements grotesque and slow. Zombie-like, yes, but not entirely mindless. And then there were the younger ones. He shuddered as the memory surfaced. The younger changed had spoken to him before. Words, actual words, crooked smiles and rasping voices. They mocked him, threatened him. One even called him by name before. He shook his head, trying to dispel the images, but they lingered like smoke. The changed weren't just monsters, they were something worse. As they finally emerged from the tunnels into the open space of the underground homestead, John felt a slight relief, but the weight of his thoughts remained. The group made their way to Stan's house, the familiar setting failing to provide the comfort it had earlier. Inside, as Stan cleaned his machete and Peter rummaged for a drink, John spoke up. "Do you have maps? Of the area? Any places you've marked as points of interest?" Stan paused, looking up from the blade. His expression softened, but his eyes carried a flicker of concern. "You don't need to go anywhere, John. You're safe here." John crossed his arms, his tone steady but firm. "I'd still like to take a look, just in case." Stan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "We have maps, but you don't need them. This place is secure. You've seen that. Why risk it out there?" John didn't answer immediately, his mind racing with reasons he couldn't explain aloud. "Because I don't trust this place. Because I don't trust the change to stay out. Because I don't know what's in those other caves. Because I need to survive, and staying here feels like waiting to die." But instead, he simply said, "I like to be prepared." Stan studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "All right, I'll show you. But promise me one thing. Think hard before you decide to leave." John didn't respond, but his resolve only deepened. "I've been thinking hard since the moment I got here." The maps were spread across the table, a mix of detailed topographical charts and hand-drawn sketches. Stan slid one over to John, pointing out landmarks and satellite markers. "This is the surrounding area," he said. "Everything we've mapped out over the years." John's eyes scanned the paper, piecing together familiar shapes and features. His breath caught when he spotted something, a cluster of houses near a small park. His old neighborhood. Just a few houses down from where his own home had been, a small satellite icon was sketched with a note scribbled next to it, "Potential survivor activity." He tapped the icon. Someone's alive here?" Stan leaned over, squinting at the mark. "We don't know for sure. That was logged months ago, maybe longer. Could just be residual signals or some old tech someone left running. But if you're thinking of checking it out, it might be worth the risk." He didn't answer immediately, his mind reeling with possibilities. Someone alive near my home? Could they know what happened? Could they have seen my family? As he studied the map further, another location jumped out at him. A winding trail leading to a rocky outcrop, it was unmistakable. He recognized the jagged lines and the shaded relief. It was the site of his team's ambush. A chill ran down his spine as the memory surfaced unbidden. The chaos, the screams, the blood. He clenched his fists, swallowing hard. That place, there could be answers there too. Or just more ghosts. His eyes darted to the rest of the map. There were several other marks, red X's circled zones, even a few scribbled question marks. But one spot stood out. It was shaded in blue, a bold outline surrounding it. "What's this?" John asked, pointing to the blue highlighted area. Stan's expression darkened, and he leaned back in his chair. "That's a no-go zone," he said firmly. Stay out of that area at all costs. Why? Stan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. High density of monkeys and apes in that region. Some of them were already aggressive before the change, but now, most of them are infected. And they're not like the changed humans. They're worse, stronger, faster, smarter. They work together. It's like they're organizing. Organizing? John repeated, his stomach turning. Stan nodded grimly. We've lost people trying to scout that area. It's not just a few of them, it's packs. Tribes, even. Once you're in their territory, you're not getting out. Even the changed avoid that zone. John stared at the blue-marked area, his heart pounding. The idea of infected primates, creatures already intelligent and physically formidable, was more than unsettling. It was horrifying. Stan leaned forward, his tone low and serious. If you value your life, you'll steer clear of that place. Whatever you're looking for, it's not worth it. John nodded slowly, but his eyes lingered on the map. The weight of what he'd just learned pressed down on him. His old neighborhood, the ambush site, and now this forbidden zone. Each mark on the map felt like a thread pulling him in a different direction. But one thing was certain, he couldn't stay here forever. Thanks, John said finally, folding the map neatly. I'll think about it. Stan didn't press him further, but his expression made it clear he wasn't entirely convinced. As John tucked the map into his back, his mind churned with possibilities. The changed, the primates, the survivors. If I go, where do I even start? He stood at the entrance of the homestead, his bag slung over his shoulder, his mind still heavy with the weight of the decision he'd made. The familiar hum of the satellites in the distance seemed like a distant, muffled reminder of everything he was leaving behind. He cast a glance over the underground space once more, feeling an odd sense of finality. This place had been a refuge, something that had kept him safe in a world that had lost its grip on sanity, but it wasn't home. It never had been. He turned, walking toward the door, the sound of his boots echoing in the silence. His thoughts wandered back to the day everything had changed. He had been out shopping when it started, a simple errand, a routine that had once seemed so mundane. But that day, the sirens had sounded and chaos had consumed the streets before he could even make it back to his family. He hadn't known then that his world was about to fall apart. He remembered the plan clearly, meet at the house. Stay put. Wait. Everyone knew what to do. But no one ever came. They never showed up. His wife, his son, they were gone. He had waited for 2 years at that house, hanging on to hope like a lifeline, scanning every face that passed, hoping against reason that he would see them again. But after 2 years, hope had started to feel like a memory, fading and distant, slipping through his fingers like water. And then, when it finally became impossible to stay any longer, he had left. He moved on, surviving the way he had to. But the ache never truly went away. He laughed bitterly as he shook his head, the sound of it feeling hollow. He had spent so much time searching, wandering, and never once did he think to check if a satellite was down the street from his old home. The one thing that might have kept him connected, the one thing that could have been the key to finding someone else alive in this godforsaken world. A bitter chuckle escaped his lips as he stepped into the cold air. He had spent all that time believing his neighborhood was lost, but a satellite just down the street could have changed everything, could have given him a clue, but now it was too late. He squared his shoulders. The decision had been made. He couldn't stay at the homestead. He couldn't live in limbo, wondering what might have been. It was time to find out what was left of the world he used to know. The truth, whether good or bad, was waiting for him back in the place where everything had started. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, preparing to leave the underground homestead behind for good, the sudden screech that echoed from deep within the cave made him freeze mid-step. It was an awful, guttural sound, one that reverberated through the very air, making the hairs on his neck rise. It wasn't just the shrillness of it. There was a primal, chilling quality to the screech, something that hinted at pure malice. He glanced toward the darkness of the cave system, the distant sound twisting his gut. He shook his head, unwilling to entertain the thought of what it could be. He had no interest in finding out. His feet carried him toward the stairs, each step echoing in the empty space as he ascended, the cool air growing thinner the closer he got to the surface. The thought of being above ground, of leaving this place and its unsettling atmosphere, filled him with a growing sense of urgency. But as he climbed the stairs, a sound stopped him. A laugh. At first, it was light, almost playful, a chuckle that was oddly out of place in the tension of the moment. But it didn't stop there. The laugh grew louder, more intense, the chuckling deepening into something darker. A fit of hysteria, one that scraped against his eardrums and settled like ice in his veins. It was unnatural, filled with madness and hunger, like the laughter of someone long past the brink of reason. John's heart stuttered. The laughter twisted, warping into something unholy, an echo of torment that seemed to come from every direction at once. It was so unsettling that his stomach churned, and he instinctively looked over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, their face twisted with the insanity of it all. But there was no one. The laughter continued, rising and falling in frantic bursts, until it became almost unbearable. It was then that the dread hit him, deep and heavy, crushing every thought that had been circling his mind. The laughter, it wasn't just a random madness. It was Chris. The laughter, wild and unfathomable, was Chris. He remembered the warning Stan had given him earlier, how the satellite signal had driven Chris mad, how the very frequencies that kept them safe had destroyed him. Chris wasn't just lost. He had become something else entirely, someone unrecognizable, his mind shattered by the same signal that had kept them alive. The echoes of his madness would stay with him forever. And then, as the laughter faded, a new scent reached John's nostrils: smoke. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it was there. A faint, acrid smell, creeping in like an unwelcome reminder of the world outside. His pulse quickened. The sound of Chris's laughter was still fresh in his mind, but now the smell of smoke added a new layer of terror to the mix. Something was burning, something close, and the dread that had already settled in his chest deepened. The laughter grew louder, more frantic the higher John climbed, echoing off the walls like a grotesque chorus. It was a sound that clawed at his mind, each burst more unsettling than the last. The air grew heavier, and with each step, the stench of smoke thickened, suffocating him. His lungs burned as the heat intensified, the distant crackling of flames becoming a constant companion to Chris's maddening laughter. It was as though the fire itself was crawling down the stairs, reaching for him with hungry fingers. The darkness around him seemed to press in tighter, the smoke wrapping around him in thick, oppressive layers. Still, he couldn't stop. He had to get to the top, to see it for himself, to make sure Chris wasn't lost completely. When he finally reached the top, the sight that greeted him was something out of a nightmare. Chris was on the ground, curled up in a heap, his body trembling with laughter that seemed to pierce through the thickening smoke. His eyes were wide, but there was no recognition in them, no human spark. Just empty, manic glee.
I don't know you!